Imagine, just for a second, that you are sitting around a campfire in the dead of night.
Right. Classic spooky setup.
Exactly. But instead of, the warmth of burning wood, the only thing illuminating the faces around you is the harsh, cold glow of a computer monitor.
Oh, that's incredibly eerie.
Yeah. And the person sitting next to you, the one whispering a terrifying story into your ear, they have no face. They have no name. You have no idea who they are or where they came from.
That really sets the tone for what we're doing today.
Right. So take a breath and hold on to that image, because that is exactly the atmosphere we are stepping into. Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today is to dig through this really fascinating stack of provided sources. Archival internet history, sociological research, folklore studies.
It's a huge stack of material.
And it really is. And
Sure.
we are going to use it to figure out how online ghost stories became a literal mirror for our modern anxieties. Basically, we are exploring the ecosystem of creepypasta.
Right, which is a term I think a lot of people have heard but maybe don't fully understand.
Yeah, we all know how this genre mutated out of those early copypasta threads on anonymous boards, blocks of text people would just copy and paste.
Hmm.
But we are looking past the cheap jump scares today. We really want to understand how these narratives function as legitimate, persistent digital folklore.
And that campfire analogy you just used, it captures the dynamic perfectly, honestly.
So.
Because we are looking at a fundamental shift in how human beings process and distribute folklore. I mean, before the internet, oral traditions traveled so slowly.
Right, like by word of mouth.
Exactly. A story went from voice to voice, town to town, and it shifted over decades. The basic human impulse to gather in the dark and scare each other, that hasn't changed at all.
We still love being scared.
Yeah, we do. What changed is the infrastructure. Today, that folklore moves at the speed of fiber optics. And crucially, unlike a spoken campfire tale that just vanishes into the night air, digital folklore leaves a permanent, searchable trace.
Right, it's always there. And we are talking about something that weaponizes the very formats we interact with every single day, right?
Oh, totally.
Because these stories, they aren't formatted like a traditional Gothic horror novel. They hijack our everyday digital reality. They disguise themselves as recovered text files or urgent forum warnings or unlisted YouTube videos.
Yes, that's the key.
Because, when you open a published novel, you have an unspoken contract with the author, you look at the cover, you see their name, and your brain says, okay, this is a work of fiction, I am safe.
And that contract is completely gone here.
Mm.
The anonymous image boards of the early 2000s, specifically places like 4chan, they just completely shattered that author-reader contract.
Yeah.
When someone posts completely anonymously on a chaotic message board, the narrative doesn't feel authored by a person sitting at a keyboard. It feels discovered. It feels like a real artifact.
It's basically the digital equivalent of finding a blood-stained diary in the woods.
That is a perfect way to put it.
But I guess my question is, how does that psychological trick actually work on us? I mean, rationally, when you are scrolling at 2 a.m., your brain knows there are no monsters hiding in the server code.
You would hope so, yeah.
Right. Yet these specific stories somehow manage to bypass our logical defenses. How are they doing that?
Well, they bypass those defenses through very deliberate narrative mechanics. The most prominent one in the research is this militant reliance on first-person, highly constrained perspective.
Okay, so I saw this thing.
Exactly. You are only getting the frantic, limited viewpoint of the person experiencing the terror. Add to that the integration of hyper-specific, everyday, mundane constraints.
What do you mean by mundane constraints?
Well, the writers use actual geographic coordinates, familiar software glitches, everyday tech frustrations. So a story might start by complaining about a corrupted hard drive or a weird email routing error.
Oh, so it feels super normal.
Right. It establishes a baseline of utter, boring plausibility. It earns your trust with the mundane before it ever introduces the supernatural.
Man, it builds a cage of reality around you before it drops the monster inside.
That is exactly it. And once the monster is inside, the story deliberately refuses to let you out.
Wait, how so?
Well, this is a critical mechanism, the lack of resolution. There is rarely a neat bow tying the narrative together. No final defeat of the evil, no clear explanation of the entity's motives.
It just ends.
Yeah, it just ends. Many folklorists actually categorize the bulk of creepypastas as anti-legends.
Anti-legends. I haven't heard that term before.
Yeah, so a traditional legend, think of Aesop's fables or older fairy tales. It seeks to impart a moral lesson or provide a satisfying closed narrative arc. and anti-legend purposely subverts those expectations.
No, I see.
Challenges our psychological need for closure by offering zero comfort and zero answers. The ambiguity itself is the payload.
Wow. And you know that lack of resolution is practically an invitation, right? Because these stories felt like abandoned, unresolved artifacts. The audience couldn't just consume them and move on.
They had to engage with it.
Exactly. The ambiguity demanded action. The internet stepped in and became a collective author. And I think that's the perfect bridge to looking at the titans of this genre, because the two most famous case studies in our research operate in fundamentally different ways.
Oh, absolutely.
First, obviously, we have to look at Slender Man.
I mean, you can't talk about Creepypasta without him. He is the unavoidable cornerstone of digital folklore.
Right. But I have to challenge the popular narrative around his origin for a second based on our sources. The timeline is really well documented. Slender Man was born in 2009 during an online forum contest where users were prompted to edit ordinary photographs to include something paranormal.
Right, on the Something Awful forums.
Yeah. And one user submitted images of a tall, faceless figure in a suit lurking behind playing children. And sure, it's a deeply unsettling image, but if it was just a Photoshop contest, why did this specific image stick?
That's the real question.
Right. There are millions of creepy pictures online. The picture alone isn't what gave millions of people nightmares, is it?
No, not at all. The image was merely the scaffolding. What made Slender Man stick was his absolute emptiness.
Emptiness.
Yeah, he had no established voice, no clear origin, and no defined motivation. He was a blank slate. And that allowed for unprecedented collaborative myth-making.
Oh, because anyone could add to it.
Exactly. Yeah. Thousands of unseen, unconnected contributors looked at that blank slate and projected their own terrors onto it. They wrote thousands of interconnected stories. They created sprawling alternate reality video series like Marble Hornets.
I remember Marble Hornets. That was huge.
It was massive. They coded independent video games, too. The community proved that a fictional figure could evolve into a massive global cultural phenomena just through the collective, decentralized will of the internet.
It was essentially an open source mythology.
Yes, open source horror.
But then contrast that with her second major case study, Jeff the Killer.
Oh, wow. Yeah, completely different beast.
This one is fascinating because it is the complete opposite of a shared, complex mythology. The story features a character with a chalk-white face, unblinking eyes, and a Glasgow smile carved into his cheeks.
It's a very harsh visual.
Very harsh. And there is no sprawling, collaborative lore here. The narrative itself is almost painfully simple.
Well, it is simple because it doesn't rely on lore to survive. Jeff the Killer functioned on a completely different core mechanism. It was viral, algorithmic repetition.
Just spamming the image, basically.
Basically, yeah. The image attached to the story was a single, heavily manipulated, genuinely abrasive photograph. It was utilized essentially as a weaponized visual.
It operated like a digital virus.
Totally.
I mean, think about the physical reaction you have when you are reading a completely unrelated, mundane thread about, I don't know, video games or politics, and suddenly that face takes up your entire monitor.
It's a jump scare in text form.
Yeah. It is a violation of your digital personal space.
And that violation highlights a very dark psychological reality of our online spaces. Repetition creates its own gravity.
What do you mean by gravity?
Well, the more a terrifying image or story is copied, pasted, and encountered unexpectedly across different contexts, the more inescapable it begins to feel.
I get it.
Slender Man grew through creative, deliberate collaboration. Jeff the Killer grew through sheer, blunt force replication. When a user sees the same horrifying image hiding in 10 different unrelated forums, their brain begins to process it not as a story, but as an omnipresent threat within the digital environment.
Wow. But we do have to address what happens when that illusion of an omnipresent threat overrides reality.
Yeah, we really do.
Because when you blur the lines between fiction and reality so effectively and you distribute it globally, it will inevitably intersect with vulnerable minds. The real-world consequences of this digital folklore are severe, and our research outlines several devastating incidents.
It's incredibly tragic. The intersection of weaponized ambiguity and mental vulnerability is where this folklore just disappeared. It ceases to be a thought experiment.
Right. In 2014, the phenomenon breached the mainstream news cycle in the most horrific way, with the Slender Man stabbing in Wisconsin.
Yes, that was a huge turning point.
It really was. Two 12-year-old girls lured their friend into a wooded area and stabbed her multiple times. The victim miraculously survived, thank goodness. But the chilling part was the interrogation.
Their motives, yeah.
The perpetrators explicitly stated they committed the violence to appease Slender Man, to prove the skeptics wrong and to become his proxies. And one of the attackers was later found to be experiencing schizophrenia-induced auditory hallucinations.
Which is just so heartbreaking.
It is, and this wasn't an isolated phenomenon. A year later in Indiana, a 12-year-old girl fatally stabbed her stepmother, claiming she was directed to do so by a creepypasta character named Laughing Jack.
Right.
She had been suffering from untreated dissociative identity disorder for months prior, so as an expert, I have to ask why. Why were these children so convinced?
It's a crucial question. And it really forces an urgent sociological analysis of these digital ecosystems. It circles back to the narrative mechanics we discussed earlier. The anti-legends, the first-person fake realism, the total lack of an authorial contract.
Right, because there's no warning label.
Exactly. When a vulnerable child, or really anyone struggling with reality testing, enters these spaces, they don't just find a story. They find a massive interconnected community acting as if the monster is real.
Oh, like role-playing, but indistinguishable from reality.
Exactly. They find fake police reports treated as canon, wikis written as survival guides, and altered photos presented as evidence. The internet basically creates a hermetically sealed bubble of alternate reality.
And the breakdown of that barrier became so profound that the platform administrators themselves were forced into a bizarre position.
Yeah, they had to step in.
Following the Wisconsin attack, the team running Creepypasta.com had to issue public statements actively reminding their user base of the line between reality and fiction. They had to post disclaimers emphasizing that they were a literature site, not a cult.
Which is just wild to think about.
It is a surreal burden. You build a campfire to tell ghost stories, and suddenly you're issuing press releases begging people not to hurt each other in the dark.
It just perfectly illustrates the dangerous persistence of digital information. You know, in traditional oral folklore, the transfer of a scary story usually involved an adult telling a child, providing a safe physical context.
Right, like a parent reading a scary book.
Yeah. A parent tells the story, then turns on the lights and says goodnight. The internet strips away the adult supervision and the physical safety cues.
There's no one to turn on the lights.
Exactly. A user can tumble down a rabbit hole of highly realistic, crowdsourced horror with absolutely no external indicators that what they are consuming is fabricated.
You know, you would naturally assume that after the police investigations, the agonizing court cases, the intense mainstream media scrutiny, you'd think the entire genre would collapse under the weight of its own real-world damage.
You would think so, yeah.
But it didn't collapse. As internet speeds increased and platforms evolved from text-based boards to multimedia hubs, the nightmares simply mutated to fit the new bandwidth.
Because folklore always adapts to the most current technology available. Text blocks were no longer sufficient for an increasingly visual high-speed internet.
Right. And the format shifted drastically toward the exploitation of childhood nostalgia. We saw the explosion of lost episode narratives.
Oh, those are terrifying.
Yeah, these were highly detailed accounts of supposedly unaired, cursed, or corrupted episodes of beloved children's television shows. You had Dead Bart from The Simpsons, or Suicide Mouse twisting Mickey Mouse.
And Squidward suicide.
Yes, the
Me
most
too.
prominent one. The cultural penetration of this specific lore was so deep that the actual creators of SpongeBob SquarePants later produced an episode titled SpongeBob in Random Land, where they actually included a visual reference to the creepypasta.
I still can't believe they did that.
I know. The corporate intellectual property literally absorbed the internet folklore that was mocking it.
Taking something inherently safe, like a morning cartoon, and perverting it with digital decay is deeply effective. But an even more potent evolution happened alongside the lost episodes, which is the rise of haunted video games.
Oh, like Sonic.exe?
Exactly. Narratives like Sonic.exe or the Haunted Majora's Mask cartridge in Ben Drowned, they represent a sophisticated leap in horror mechanics.
Let's break down that mechanism for a second, because a haunted video game feels entirely different from reading a text file. Why does a corrupted save file induce so much anxiety?
It comes down to the subversion of player agency and the breaking of closed systems.
What do you mean by closed systems?
Well, a video game is built on rigid, predictable rules. When you press a button, the avatar jumps. You are in total control of that digital environment. The horror in stories like Ben Drowned occurs when that closed loop shatters.
Oh, when it stops obeying you.
Exactly. The game stops obeying the code and starts acknowledging the player. The avatar turns and looks directly at the screen. The game alters its own save files or seemingly speaks to the user.
That is so creepy.
It strips away the illusion of control. The player is no longer the god of the digital space. They have become the target.
The game is playing you.
Yes.
And this transition from static reading to interactive anxiety perfectly sets the stage for what scholars in the sources now call fourth-generation digital fiction or electronic literature. It's no longer just a story you scroll past. It is an immersive multimedia experience.
It really is.
And that brings us to the current apex of this evolution. Analog horror.
Analog horror represents a massive shift from character-driven scares to visual and spatial dread.
The Backrooms is the definitive example here. And it started the exact same way Slender Man did, a single photograph.
Just one image.
Yeah, but instead of a monster, it was just an image of a seemingly endless, empty maze of office space. Yellow wallpaper, old damp carpets, and the maddening hum of fluorescent lights.
So looking at it makes you uncomfortable, right?
Right, and that one picture spawned a colossal mythology about clipping out of reality and becoming trapped in this infinite liminal space.
Liminal spaces are deeply fascinating from a psychological perspective. They are transitional environments. Hallways, waiting rooms, empty offices, spaces meant to be passed through, never inhabited.
Places you aren't supposed to stay.
Right. When you strip them of human context and present them as endless, they evoke a visceral sense of wrongness. The horror of the Backrooms isn't that a monster is chasing you. It's the crushing spatial isolation.
It's just you and the hum.
Yes. It reflects the isolation of navigating the vast, empty architectures of the internet itself.
And the cultural trajectory of the Backrooms proves how legitimate this form of storytelling has become. A 17-year-old creator built an incredibly complex, visually stunning YouTube series exploring the Backrooms lore.
It's so well made.
It really is. And it gained so much traction that A24, the powerhouse production company behind massive Hollywood horror films, they actually stepped in to develop it into a feature film with that same 17-year-old attached to direct.
That's incredible.
We have gone from anonymous text dumped on a message board to major studio backing.
And beyond Hollywood, we are seeing real institutional validation. The American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress has actively been archiving these internet narratives.
Like, really? The Library of Congress?
Yeah. When the Library of Congress catalogs a digital phenomenon alongside traditional American folklore, it solidifies that these aren't disposable internet trash. They are vital, defining cultural artifacts of our era.
It is a phenomenal evolution. We've tracked this from the murky depths of 4chan, through the collaborative heights of Slender Man, through the tragic real-world violence of weaponized virality, all the way to high-end analog horror and the archives of the Library of Congress.
It's been a journey.
It really has. Synthesizing all of this, I think it is clear that creepypastas are not just collections of words meant to make you jump. They are a massive, interconnected system of psychological processing.
I'd go so far as to say they are a flawless cultural mirror.
Yeah.
Yeah? Think about it. Centuries ago, traditional folklore warned us about the very real dangers of wandering into the dark woods or trusting strangers on the road.
Keep to the path, don't talk to the wolf.
Exactly. Today, our woods are digital. Creepypasta reflects our profound modern anxieties. It articulates our deep-seated fear of the technology we rely on. It voices our terror over losing agency in algorithmic environments.
Because we don't control the algorithm.
No, we don't.
Hmm.
And most critically, it weaponizes the persistence of the internet itself. Once a terrifying idea is introduced and replicated a million times, you cannot delete it. It lives forever in the infrastructure.
Man. Think about that the next time you were sitting alone scrolling through an endless feed with only the harsh glow of your monitor lighting the room. We have seen how anonymous ideas passed around a digital campfire can gather enough momentum to alter reality, sometimes with tragic, irreversible consequences.
It's a sobering thought.
It is. So I want to leave you with a final thought today, something to let rattle around in your mind the next time you encounter a story online that feels just a little too real. If entirely fictional entities can be willed into a type of reality simply because millions of people shared them, what happens when the lines of our physical and digital worlds blur so completely that the internet itself functions as a haunted house?
Oh, wow.
When you log on, are you merely reading the folklore of our time? Or with every click, every share, and every algorithm you feed, are you the one building the monster?